So welcome to Becoming an Agile Survivalist in a Zombie Scrum Reality. Thanks for attending Nebraska.Code. These kind of conferences and the amount of information that we share, it's really important for networking in the community, and it gets all of us to know each other better. So thanks for attending. Just to orient me before I start my talk, show of hands. How many people are here because they really want to know what Scrum should feel like? Okay, a couple. How many people are here because you know what Scrum should feel like, but your environment isn't like that and you want to make your environment be like that? Couple, okay. How many people just, you've given up any hope of affecting your environment and you just want to know how to get by? All right, okay, there's a couple, right? It's real. I've been in that camp myself. How many people are here just because, dude, it's zombies and zombies are cool, right? Yeah, we all love zombies. Okay. To be honest with you, I got into this when the whole craze is going with The Last of Us, and I was very zombie infected when I came up with the talk. I also built this talk with Midjourney AI. It's artificial intelligence to do amazing graphics. It's so cool. I thought, like, hey, this can actually make the entire zombie graphic novel concept I have come true. It was a lot of strife, I'll say. So probably about 50 images for every one image that I actually use in this. But it is really cool. It's really fun. It's the future. It's going to be amazing. But it is the first presentation I've ever done in this style. So, work with me a little bit here. It's also the first presentation in probably over a decade that I have no memes. So I don't have memes to orient me. This will be very interesting. So I've been talking about me a little bit. So who am I? Man, I get wistful when I look at that. First of all, thanks Midjourney for making me look 10 years younger than I do. But my name is Jerry Koske. I wrote my first program in 1981 on a TI-99 4A computer. And I've been hooked on software ever since. So I've been doing development for a long time. In 1999, I was introduced to the concept of Agile from a friend of mine. And at the time, extreme sports was a big thing. We had, what was it called? The X Games, that was going on. It was kind of crazy. And I just thought this is a marketing ploy, extreme programming. Oh, great. I'm sure, whatever. But, he's really forceful and pushing it on me. And, I started reading Kent Beck's books and started reading, what he was thinking about with Agile. And I just became hooked. Like, so many things made sense. It was so much better than the way that we were doing software at that point in time. And then a couple years later, the Agile Manifesto came out, and I read that, and just boom, blew my mind. Everything just seemed to click, and I've kind of been an evangelist for Agile ever since. I do want to say I'm an evangelist for Agile. I'm not an evangelist for Scrum. I'm not anti-Scrum, but I'm also not pro-Scrum. I think Scrum works in a lot of environments, and also in some environments there are better ways to do things. I think Scrum can work amazing, and I think Scrum can be the root of a lot of problems, and I think that's part of what I'm talking about here. And it's not properly implemented Scrum, it's improperly implemented Scrum that I think gets in the way of a lot of Agile. Beyond that, my role, right now I'm the CTO at a company called Aviture. I think we've got a booth upstairs and everything. I've been there for about 18 years now. Maybe even a little more than that. I have twins. They just went to college, and they weren't born yet when I started at the company, so it's been a long time. But what does that mean? I've been in technical management for around 18 years. It means I've seen a lot of stuff. So everything up here, this is a company that I've worked with, that I've either been managing technical efforts on, or that I've been in the weeds coding with. Most of these companies I've worked on, 3, 4, 5 different projects on. So I've seen a lot of implementations of Agile and of Scrum. I've seen what works well. I've seen what doesn't work well. I've seen deviations that you really need to make for certain environments. So just a lot of experience. But I don't want to give the impression that I'm like the deep Scrum expert, right? I'm more promoting Agile values and why they're important. So enough about me. Let's get into our story. And every zombie story has to start with an origin. So how did the zombie outbreak occur, right? Was it some science experiment gone wrong? A military weapon that was accidentally released in the atmosphere? Maybe an airborne mind-controlling spore like The Last of Us? Bad management? I don't know. In order to truly understand the zombie scrum, we really have to understand its origins. So I am going way back to the 1940s. We had the first what we consider a real digital computer. So ABD, ENIAC, those computers. And they quickly evolved in the 1950s to where we were able to actually store and execute programs. In a short order, we knew that we needed to understand how to build software and how to build it correctly, especially as software became more complex. And many thought leaders emerged in this time and started what we knew as computer science. One of these guys was Dr. Winston Royce. And so Royce saw the challenges in developing non-trivial large software systems and wrote an extremely influential paper on it. And due to this paper, many people have called him the father of waterfall. So show of hands, how many people here know waterfall? Yeah, everybody, right? Okay. How many people know the origin of waterfall? So it's kind of interesting because he wrote this paper, and it was called Managing the Development of Large Software Development Systems. And so, and this is actually the paper. Midjourney didn't do this. This is a scan from his actual paper. But if you read it, this is typical waterfall, right? Requirements, analysis, design, coding, testing, going to operation. Figure 2, this is early in this paper, implementation steps to develop a large computer program for delivery to a customer. So he proposed this. This is his idea. This is what he was in love with. He thought we should all do this. Everybody decided to do this. And then he goes on to say, I believe in this concept, but the implementation described above is risky and invites failure. The problem is illustrated below. And it's almost like he didn't believe in waterfall, but he's the father of waterfall. How could that be? Well, if you go on and read the whole paper, this is what he actually came up with. He started with this is how we typically think about development, and this is why it's wrong. So this is very complex, and this is absolutely still not agile. But the kinds of things that he said is that every step should be performed no fewer than 2 times. It should be iterative. The customer should be involved. A lot of very common themes, right? And here's the thing that blows your mind. Where he talks about this, I mean, it was part of a larger journal, but his paper on this was 11 pages. We couldn't get through 11 pages. We just had to take that first little part. So I'm being a little disingenuous, but to be honest, what Royce had in mind was not what waterfall became. And I'm sure he became mortified over it. Fast forward into the late 80s. At this point, we've all understood waterfall has issues. And so we introduced what's called spiral development. Spiral development was good in that it started doing some risk analysis and prototyping. And as it went out, more prototypes, more understanding of what you're building. And then once you have a fairly good understanding of what you're building, then you start building the software in increments. But each one of those increments is kind of like a mini waterfall. So it's almost, a lot of people think of it as a bunch of mini waterfalls. 1999, you had the Unified Software Development Process by Grady Booch, and in 2003, Rational grabbed that and made it its own. And they said, hey, this is how we should do software development. And it was another kind of heavyweight system, right? They did have iterations. So here in construction, you see 4 iterations. They had an elaboration phase, an inception phase, a transition phase, and they had overlap between the typical parts of waterfall. So we were getting a little bit better. They also had so much documentation. I mean, the Unified Software Development Process came from Grady Booch, so that had UML tied to it. I've got clear case scars from that period of time that will never heal, just because it was so documentation heavy, but we're getting better. 1999, about the same time, Extreme Programming, Kent Beck, comes out, and continuous integration, pair programming, small releases, some of the things that we're more familiar with. This was really one of the first, true agile methodologies that took hold. This is what hooked me. And then Jeff Sutherland and Ken Schwaber in 1995 published a paper, and then in 2001, the year we made contact, they released a book, and that book was called Software Development with Scrum, and that's when Scrum really started to go into the masses. Who here is familiar with Scrum? Hopefully. Okay, good. Otherwise, I got problems. But incrementing shippable releases focused on providing value, autonomous teams with empowerment. what we know as classic Scrum. So what is going on at this period of time is you've got Rational promoting this really big heavyweight framework, and you've got all of these competing what they called lightweight frameworks at the time. And so Bob Martin said, hey guys, let's all get together, all of us evangelists for what we now know as Agile, and let's see if we can find some common ground. Let's go to Snowbird Mountain, the ski resort, and get together, have some fun, ski, but also as lightweight framework mavericks, let's talk, let's ski, let's relax, let's see what we come up with. And so you had people who represented extreme programming, Scrum, DSDM, adaptive software development. Crystal was something at the time that was out quite a bit. Feature-driven development, pragmatic programming. Basically anybody who was sympathetic to the heavyweight, to an alternative to the heavyweight document-driven software development processes. And one of the things I've heard that they were concerned about was RUP. They were like, look, we can't do this again. If Rational does this, it's going to be another 10 years of bad frameworks. So the first realization that they came up with, and as I hear the story told, like the first day was kind of a cluster and everybody's putting their own ideas on the table. The second day, they kind of cleared the board and said, okay, of all of our experiences, we've all been on good projects, we've all been on bad projects, we've done the things that work, we've done the things that don't. What is common about the projects that worked really well? And the first realization was that it's the people that make it successful. Right? If you have a strong team, good interactions, good individuals, and by strong teams, I don't mean like a rock star team with the best engineers you've ever worked with. I mean teams that actually work well together. They're able to openly communicate. They trust each other. They're able to, affect change and experiment together. So that matches my experience, right? That's the best things I've had. Jim Highsmith actually, when he talked about this, he said, this is the first value for a reason. The reason is the really important stuff is the mushy stuff. I dare you to go back to your leadership and say, we just need to be more mushy, right? It's not going to work very well. But the key thing here is that the processes and the tools help, but when they supersede the people, things start to go really south. So, in my mind, Office Space made this famous, when the manager says, hey, I need your TPS reports. Nobody's talking about anything. You're talking about, something that isn't people or interactions. The second realization they came up with is that really successful projects they've been focused on building software, not building documentations and mounds of justification for what they were doing. And at this time especially, it was all too common for teams to almost spend as much or more time building the documentation. We do these heavy upfront, designs and architectures and requirements, and you basically have something this thick, and then you pass it off to the implementation team to go build, and it was basically build off a spec. And the problems that we had there were the obvious problems, is that things change, they get out of sync, documentation doesn't get updated, you can't trust the documentation, or if you try to keep the documentation up to date, it's not reliable, or you're going so slow that you can't move. Because of those slowdowns, the team gets under a time crunch. When you're in a time crunch, what do? You've got tons of pressure because you got to get this done quick. You cut corners, you get sloppy, the team's disenfranchised, apathy sets in. It's not a good thing. So we're not saying you can't have comprehensive documentation, obviously, but we're saying when it gets in the way of working software, it's not helping us. The next truth they realized was customer collaboration. And in my mind, this is extremely similar to talking about individuals and interactions. But when they thought about it, they said, hey, we work really closely with our users, with our customers, and we kind of share the risk. We share the problems. We share the solutions. We've shared the change. I can think of a software I worked when I worked at Physicians Mutual. I was side by side with one of the senior managers there, and we were building a quoting application. And it was one of the smoothest things I've ever built because they were side by side with me. They weren't an engineer, they didn't know anything about technology, but we were working on the problem together and adjusting, adapting. It wasn't let's talk via paperwork or let's talk via contract, because those contract negotiations are slow, they don't adapt, they don't change. They lead to large systems to try to control change to make sure that things don't get out of sync with the contract. Before you know it, it's kind of a mirror of waterfall design, really expensive to change the contract. And then, nobody is empowered by the contract. Instead of protecting both parties, it becomes arguments. This is not in scope. Or the change control process is so burdensome that we can't go through it. And we just don't, everyone shies away from change, right? We don't want it. Or can lead to legal battles or even worse. And the final thing, I talked about the word change a couple of times. Obviously, this is Agile. It's responding to change. Successful teams respond to change. They deviate from a plan. Doesn't mean they don't have a plan, but when the plan isn't right, they acknowledge it and they shift. And the way I always think about this, I'm kind of a football fan. It's football, right? The quarterback, talks to the coach. The coach says, "Here's the play. Here's our plan. This is what we're going to do." Quarterback gets out in the field, takes a look. What's going on? Something's different than the plan. I'm going to call an audible. Change the play, change the plan. Even if he doesn't, hikes the ball. We're going, okay, things are falling apart because life is happening now. I got somebody tripped on the line, and this, all of a sudden I've got to change the play. I've got to, in real time scramble and make something happen. That's what a good team does. Teams that are locked into a plan typically stop thinking and they become apathetic. So, the plan can't be the enemy. Having a plan, having a play when you get up there is good, but you've got to be able to call those audibles when you need to. And then, the worst thing is if you're following a plan blindly, you get into what a friend of mine called deadline delirium. And it really is. You just become delirious. Common sense goes out the window, and you are fixated on a date, and what can we do to make this date happen? And I'll tell you, my entire career, I've had some tough conversations with customers about needing to change dates. But we've always been able to change it. We've always been able to find common ground, except for Y2K. Y2K is the only thing I can think of where that date could not change. Otherwise, what do you want? Do you want something that solves your problems? Or do you want to check that day on the calendar and feel good about that and have something that is, quality, and fit for the problem, not great, Nobody wants that. So altogether, the manifesto encapsulates the values that make great teams work. And when it came out, everybody was in love with this. It was the kind of thing where engineers all over the world were like, we should do this. This is the lens that we should look at through our processes. And that leads us to managers. And the managers come in and they're like, okay, that's great. What brand of Agile do I pick? Agile sounds great, but what do I adopt? How many of you understand why your organization picks Scrum? I know you're doing Scrum, but who knows why specifically you pick Scrum? Okay, pretty much nobody. So it's important, right? What the leaders who said that we're doing this, why? What are they trying to achieve?
I would say in part in general, because there's better documentation and certification around it. Mm-hmm. So other ones were less well documented, less well understood.
That's a good, that's pretty much the way it goes. So when you,
it's funny because it's over documentation.
Oh yeah, absolutely. But it doesn't have a gross amount of documentation. So and obviously every company has different reasons why they did this. Today, I honestly think a lot of people do it just because Scrum is a de facto choice. A lot of people use it, right? But early on, I want to say when this is more new, I think, to your point, it's 20 pages, right? Now, you can call me cynical, right? And I'm not bashing managers. Managers, are smart sometimes. But, from 2011, 2020, the Scrum Guide has consistently gotten shorter. About the time most people were adapting it, it was around 20 pages. Now it's around 13 pages. The short length of the Scrum Guide, in my opinion, kind of misled some companies because you think of something that small and you think, well, how hard can that be? 20 pages? I mean, surely we can learn this and adapt it in short order. The other thing, I've heard opinions that differ about whether or not Scrum was trying to market Agile to Agile concepts to management. And I've heard it denied by some of the people who created it. I've heard other people say, no, absolutely. I've heard in closed door conversations that's exactly what they were doing. I don't know the truth, but I do know that if I were reading that as a manager, it's got commitments and you sprint to them. That sounds really fast, right? Why do we call it sprints? Honestly, like we're not running as fast as we can in 2 weeks, right? Or 1 week or whatever, however long your sprint is. We're trying to do something that is sustainable. But the terminology, firm commitments, which doesn't sound agile, and sprinting towards them, which doesn't sound like you're caring about quality. Anyway, regardless of the intent, some of these things just sounded really appealing. And talking about terminology, if you're learning Scrum for the first time, I don't think its terminology does anybody any favors. So for me, the first time I ever heard Scrum and got into it, it sounded a little bit like this, right? It's quite simple. You've got a chucker that everyone's working to complete, and every day you have a throw-in to kick off this day of the chucker. There's a third man that ensures everyone's abiding by the framework, right? That sounds ludicrous because that's polo. Obviously, if it's rugby, it makes a lot more sense, right? And that's exactly what we have. Sprint isn't rugby, right? But sprint isn't an accurate term for what we're doing there. And every day you have a scrum. What's a scrum? I don't know. I'm American, but I guess I'll learn a little bit about rugby. And you got sprints, and there's a scrum master. I don't know. Let's invent an entirely new term there. It's just obscure and it's hard to grasp, and that's something that we faced early on. And I really wish we did something like this, which probably isn't as marketable, but we've got an iteration everyone's working to complete, and every day you've got a planning meeting to kick this day off for the iteration. And there's a facilitator to make sure everyone's abiding by the framework. I mean, man, that makes sense, and it's hard to misinterpret. It's hard to make your own definition of Scrum if you did something like that. And last, to your point, Scrum Masters. How many Scrum Masters are in the room? Raise your hand if you. Okay. I don't want to offend you guys. Good. Because it is darned easy to become a Scrum Master, right? A certified Scrum Master, you can take a 2-day test. You can pass that test. You are a Scrum Master. There are some companies don't even certify their Scrum Masters. They just take like a project manager and they, read this and then they anoint them as a Scrum Master. I'm a scuba diver. And as a scuba diver, if I'm in new territory I've never been with, I'm with a dive master. That dive master is an expert in diving and has had a lot of experience and a lot of training and has gone through a lot of, not just dive training, but medical training and things like that. If I'm getting into a fight, I don't want to get into a fight with a kung fu master, right? Because that's somebody who really knows their stuff. But chess, I don't want to play against chess master. But this whole thing about, here's someone is a Scrum Master just gives the impression that this is somebody to be trusted and, that you can whole hog, know this person has got you covered. So my own personal, opinion on this is that Scrum Master certification should be more involved. I do, appreciate the higher orders of Scrum Master when you get there, and I've worked with some amazing Scrum Masters, so this is not a dig on Scrum Masters. But I've also worked with some tremendously horrible ones, and that can be part of the problem too. And again, it's so short, it's so concise. How can we get it wrong? Waterfall, right? This happens. And when you don't understand something, you create an agile process that looks like this. It hurts my mind. It's like somebody has an altimeter on their hiking watch and then they want to go scuba diving and figure out how deep they are. I don't want to open this can of worms. I'm not a fan of SAFe, obviously, but it's not for this talk. This talk's to stay focused on Scrum. But in my mind, Scrum should be grounded on the Agile principles, and this is not Agile. Which leads us to, I've just kind of scratched the surface on how we got here, but really, I think a lot of companies were looking for silver bullets. If we do Scrum, we're going to get good development. It's going to be fast, it's going to be accurate, it's going to be quick, all the problems of the past are going to go away. And as much as we'd like it, there isn't silver bullets in what we do, right? That's, I think, Art's theme on a lot of the talks that he has. There's no easy, clear solution. And so just like using Midjourney on this, it was not as easy as I wanted. But everything I talked about is kind of setting the stage for then Zombie Scrum. So this is the world we got into as we got into Zombie Scrum. So what is Zombie Scrum? In my mind, it's like Scrum dystopia. And dystopia is really the best word I can think of it. A lot of times, I mean, I'm using it here, obviously, for a post-apocalyptic world. But dystopia comes from the Greek. It means dys means bad, and topia means place. So it's Scrum in a bad place. And Zombie Scrum, it was actually, and I butcher names, so I'm going to read this, but it was coined by Christian Weiss, Johannes Chartot, and Barry Overeem. And what they're really talking about here is this is a team that is going through the motions of Scrum. They very much on the surface look like a Scrum team. They're doing the right ceremonies, they're ticking all the boxes, but they're not really living the heart and the soul of the Scrum guide. And then after this, they even created a book. I didn't know that when I created this talk, called the Zombie Scrum Survival Guide. So a little close to what I'm talking about here, but mine's a little bit different because I'm really focusing on that Agile soul. And in 2014, Dave Thomas noted, and he's one of the guys who's at Snowbird Mountain, Agile Manifesto. He's one of the fathers of it. He said, Agile is dead, and we need to focus on agility. What he meant by that is the Agile processes are being used without an Agile mindset. People are coming into this and basically doing zombie Scrum. And if we stop talking about Scrum and we start talking about agility, we're going to see a lot of improvements in what we do and how we do it. And so I'm going to showcase a few examples here of what zombie Scrum looks like. And then I'll start talking about, okay, what are some of the things we can do about it? So a common thing I found is something I call blind Scrum. I've also heard it cargo cult Scrum or homegrown Scrum. It's basically, in my opinion, it's Scrum when you've got good intentions, but you really don't know what you're doing. So you get into it and you start, kind of like this analogy here. Like you're in front of this person finds this drawing, and the artist drew a bridge, which is technically correct, but they didn't understand the intent of the instructions here at all. And so they totally misused it. And so the problem with this whole concept is people believe they're doing the right thing, but they're not. And an example of that to me, one of the bigger examples, is the daily Scrum that you have, right? It is a planning meeting. In the last version of the Scrum guide, they got rid of the 3 questions. I don't know if anybody noticed that, right? Because the 3 questions really led people down the wrong path. You had a lot of stand-ups where people were going around in a circle. Yesterday I did story 1, 2, 3. Today I'm going to work on task 3, 4, 8. I have no impediments. Next, right? And repeat all the way around. There was no conversation. There was no collaboration. There was no planning. Nobody was talking about the sprint goal or changing it or how are you going to get to it. Everything in the daily Scrum is supposed to be about what are we trying to achieve this sprint and how are we going to do it? What's my contribution to it? Again, plans change. So we got to the ball. Coach called the plan. That was sprint planning, and now we're going to adjust. We might call an audible. We might change a few things. A great example of that is, I think of deprioritizing work. Right. A lot of times people go, well, we can't change what's in the sprint. It's all locked in. No, that's the entire purpose of the daily Scrum, is so you can go talk to the product owner and say, hey, we gotta make a change here if we're gonna hit the sprint goal. Otherwise, we're not gonna achieve what we need to achieve. Another great example of this I see are retrospectives. Retrospectives are not a place where people get together and complain. Retrospective should be where we start talking about what are we gonna do different next time. So it's not just what are the things that didn't go well and what did go well, and okay, well now we're aware of that. Let's all keep it mindful, right? We should change the way that we work. Scrum is not a methodology. Scrum is a framework. The methodology the team creates. So how do you want to do it? Okay, is that working? Is that not? Let's change it, right? So, well, I'll get to it in a little bit, but trying to control the uncontrollable. This is something I see all the time, right? And I think of it in terms of this analogy where, like, look, we can't have bad weather. We're just so far behind. If we have a thunderstorm, we are screwed, right? We don't have a plan for a thunderstorm. Okay, well, you can't affect the weather. And I think it's kind of a holdover from traditional development where we tried to think of everything up front in waterfall. This is really, in my mind, rooted in organizational fear and people going, well, the bad thing can't happen, right? And that's the opposite of Agile. Agile is like, we know the bad things are going to happen. Let's get to them as fast as possible so we can adapt, because adaptation is what we're all about. And I'm going to foot stomp and go a little crazy on this. Story points and velocity is a great example of control, especially the way a lot of organizations use it. So how many of you have been in meetings where you've spent way too much time debating story points? A lot of value there, right? What about if you've been given stories that are already sized and you had no say in it? You're going to work the story, here's your size? Okay. How many times have you heard the word, the team didn't hit their velocity? Like, you don't hit a velocity, right? It's a measurement. What about management being concerned because velocity is decreasing and we're not going to hit our date at this velocity, right? First of all, hopefully people know this, but if you don't, I'm going to tell you. Story points and velocity are not a part of Scrum. You can search the Scrum guide, it is nowhere in there. And that's where I was talking earlier about the team gets to choose their methodology. It's the methodology. It's a methodology for the team to determine their commitments for this sprint. So they can choose, hey, story points and velocity is a good way so that we can commit to a reasonable amount of work that we can get done in this sprint. For us, not for management, not to go outside of the team, right? What happens when you go outside of the team? Well, the managers start looking at velocity and they start thinking of it as performance, not capacity, but performance. Why is our performance going down? That is a concern, right? That's not what velocity is. Because what's the purpose of a sprint? To deliver an increment of value. What value is there in the story point? I can have a 1-point story that solves a lot of business problems for somebody, right? I'm going to this page and this is where we could capture new users or credit card information. If only we had a link that took them to this other product page. I'll give you that link. That's easy. That's a 1-page story, right? Or 1-point story. I could have something that has phenomenal business or no business value, right? It's an executive's idea about, hey, I want to experiment and try something. It may work, it may not, I don't know, right? And it could be very complicated. That could be 30 points, worth of stuff. Points don't tell you anything. They don't tell you the value that's getting into the product. So what you have is this sense of trying to affect things that it's all kind of a falsehood, right? I mean, you've got managers saying, oh, I need to control velocity, which I can't control, and I need it to go faster, okay. And then you have teams saying, oh, okay, no, I gave you more numbers. Do you want more numbers? I'll give you more numbers. You want 30? I'll give you 30. You want 100? I'll give you 100. I'll hit that number that you're trying to crank up, right? It provides no value. And Scrum does talk about this, right? We're supposed to be working off of empirical evidence. Story points aren't empirical. All right. The other common thing I see in zombie Scrum is cherry picking practices, right? A lot of times this is called Scrum butt, right? If you're a musician, you got to tune all of your strings. Otherwise, it sounds bad. Kind of the same thing with Scrum. Scrum is very explicit about this in the Scrum guide. You use all of it or you use none of it. It's designed to come together. It's only 14 pages or 13 or whatever it is, right? It's not a lot. It's very concise. But what Scrum butt does, and this is what most people don't like, it exposes something wrong in the organization. And Scrum butt covers it up. So Scrum, if you do it, the way it's written, exposes the problem, Scrum but just covers it up. And that's cherry picking. And I think one of the examples I see of this is assignments. How many people have been assigned a story to work or assigned a task to work, right? You come out of sprint planning or you come into sprint planning and it's like, okay guys, here's the backlog and these are the stories that we're going to focus on. A closed group of people like kind of figured this out. Anybody been in that situation? Yep. So that is not at all what you're supposed to be doing. That's cherry picking. And it's really important that the team is the one. The product owner determines what goes in the backlog. The team, determines what they're going to fit into the sprint. Nobody else. Otherwise, it's kind of like waterfall. And so the Scrum Guide's really specific on this. During the sprint planning, the team's supposed to ask, why is this sprint valuable? That's an open question in planning. And what can we do in this sprint? Capacity. And then how is this work going to get done? Decompose it into tasks. Start to figure out how the team's going to effectively work against that. That is owned only by the development team and nobody else. Task urgency is something that is another common pattern that I see in zombie Scrum. So this is a prospector while the entire zombie outbreak is happening. He's like mining for gold or whatever, and he's panning for it. And he's consumed with the task of panning. He's been doing it for weeks, just pan. And he's kind of apathetic at this point. He's been panning for a long time and found almost no gold. Meanwhile, there's gold in them there hills. Like right there's 2 giant, nuggets of gold. And he's not seeing it because he's focused on the task. This is the same thing as having no sprint goal. When you don't have a sprint goal, all you're working is clearing the board of stories. That is not providing the value. Teams can provide a lot of innovation if they understand what they're trying to solve. They can come up with different approaches, things that stakeholders have never thought of. The assumption that we come up in sprint planning, like we said, might not be valid anymore. If you don't have a sprint goal, how do you know whether or not what you're doing is valid? So take, for example, if we're working on a sprint and the goal for the sprint is actually to accept payments from our customers. Okay? If I'm just looking at clearing a board, I could come to the end of the sprint and be like, we worked as hard as we could, we hit as many tasks as we could, but we just failed the sprint. We did not close out all the stories. And that's the end of it. Or I could say, hey, we achieved the ability for customers to make payments. Although at this time, we can't handle PayPal, but we can do the other ones, right? We can do all the credit cards. You might be surprised how many times the business comes back and says, oh, good enough. Let's move on to the next thing. We'll go back and get PayPal later, right? If you look at it through that lens, through the lens of value in the sprint goal, you're finding those gold nuggets, and you're not just going in the stream and failing when you're not. The last thing, or second to last thing maybe, is cultural context. So cultural context is, sometimes it's called like the smell of the place. And it's a hard thing to define, but there's actually Professor Goschel, he's a business management professor, but he has this analogy talking about how to make people perform well. And he says, if you take a person himself, he's Indian, and he said, I love Calcutta, I'm from Calcutta. Summer in Calcutta is horrible. It's 100 and some degrees, 99% humidity. No matter what, I have no energy. I don't want to do anything. I stay indoors all the time. I also live in France, near Fontainebleau Forest. I can't speak French, so it's as close as I can go. But he's like, in spring, it's crisp. You can smell the trees, the flowers. I dare you to walk in that forest, take a leisurely stroll. You can't. You're running, you're jumping, you want to grab a tree, it's just so invigorating. And that's what he calls, kind of the smell of the place. I think of it in terms of agile teams. We always think in business context. The most agile team, one of the most agile ones I work with is my buddies when I go on a fishing trip. We're going to usually we hit 4 or 5 lakes in a day. and all of us just kind of figure out what we need to do with that, with the boat, and organically split the work up between ourselves, get it done. It's a good environment. We're all excited to be there and what we're doing, and it just leads towards harmony and people just doing the right thing at the right time. Oh, Jerry sucks at backing up the trailer. Well, don't let him do it. I'll do it. Okay, Jerry, what do you want to do? I'll take the tarp off the boat. Okay, I'll take the plug out, so on and so forth. If you're in a good environment, people just naturally tend to work together without needing a lot of management. An example of that, I think, is fixating on reports. How many people have been told, like, hey, we're not green, we need to be green, right? Again, it's not Agile. You can have good metric reports like Dora. I'm a big fan of Dora reports. But the essential parts of Agile is growth, personal, professional, discipline, so you're not doing cowboy coding, support, any leadership should help me win, and trust. And trust's the big one. And I'm not proud of this, but there was one point I was working with some management that was a little hung up on reports, and I switched the colors on them. Didn't do anything else, right? But red was good, green was bad. And I set off a shitstorm of feedback, right? Everybody was like, oh my gosh, we're red, we're gonna die. And I'm just like, hey, we've never been better. But it's interesting how much people react to superficial things like that. All right, so that's a good kind of idea of what zombie Scrum looks like. There's a million different examples. I just touched on a few of them. But now I want to talk about what we can do to affect it, right? Is it just something that we're stuck with? Is Scrum fundamentally flawed? What do we want to do? My thoughts, no, Scrum is not fundamentally flawed. And I think it can be very good if we've got the right mindset coming into it. I think I really enjoy something from Art's earlier talk that he had about how not to strangle your coworkers. But he talked about how a single member of a group can influence that group's behavior, and only if you're in good standing with the group. So let's talk kind of about how that might apply to zombie Scrum. So the first thing that you can do, educate the zombies, right? People who aren't living Agile, they want to be in a better situation. Nobody wants to be stuck in a situation where we're under these deadlines that are reoccurring and so on and so forth. So look beyond the problems that you personally are feeling and find the problems that the team is having and start to talk about how we address our common problems. It subtly starts to put people in an Agile mindset, and it helps to continually discuss the practices of Scrum through that Agile lens. So an example of that might be in retro or something. Hey, last sprint we failed because we weren't all working together. You were working this task and you changed an interface that hit me and we didn't collaborate. Again, retro, don't say, okay, we should watch out for that in the future. Maybe from now on in the Scrum, instead of just going around in a circle, maybe we should actually call out where we have work that we're doing that might depend on somebody else. And maybe we should go outside after the Scrum and talk to each other, right? Bring it up as an idea to solve a problem that we're experiencing. Don't get preachy, because you want the trust of the team. So don't talk about, oh man, we're so screwed up, I can't believe we can't do this right. We're the worst Scrum people ever. We're Agile in name only. Just basically don't be a dick. And people are going to be, identifying with that quite a bit. The other thing is set an example. Very rarely are you actually forced to be a zombie. A lot of times we just kind of surrender. Well, if this is what the whole team's doing, I guess, During sprint planning, discuss what the goal should be, right? Even if the rest of the team isn't doing it. During a daily Scrum, talk about what you're doing and how it is going to affect the value of the product. Or if you have a sprint goal, how you're going to meet that sprint goal. Reach out to your team members and inquire, like, hey, what are you doing? Oh, cool. I want to show you what I'm doing, right? No one's going to stop you. And ask your product owner, hey, how what I am working on right now provides value? I don't understand. I got this task, but how does it relate to the customer and the product? If you're under pressure, they might say we don't have time for that, but be persistent. People are going to open up. Nobody's going to be upset that you want to understand what you're doing. Don't be hostile about it. Be curious. And in a short amount of time, what you're going to find out is you're going to know more than a lot of people on the team. And they're going to turn towards you. And they're going to look to you for advice. And then you're kind of in that position because you know what you're doing. You're able to present outcomes better. And at that point, you're able to say, well, this is what I do and this is why. And you can start to share some of those agile approaches and mindsets. Introduce other environments. One more time. Nobody wants to do zombie scrum. There's not a single manager that is like, I'm out here to affect my team negatively. This does not exist. They just don't know better. So introduce them to people who do know better. There's a lot of aha moments when you see something in practice as opposed to when you're trying to do it yourself. So there's guest speakers that can come to your company and talk about things. There's other proponents in the Agile community that you can introduce to your coworkers in your company. You can create internal learning clubs or groups to talk about Agile within your company. You can encourage other people to go to meetups like this. And the great thing about it, your companies will support you, right? Or they at least won't stand in your way. But a lot of times, every company wants more educated workers. And so they'll either, give you some resources, might just be a free lunch or whatever, to support you getting together. Or again, they're not going to stop you and you're going to start to affect and influence people. The flip side of it is involve the larger communities. It's hard. It is really hard to transform the culture and the environment. But the Agile community exists. There's online groups, there's local meetups, there's peers, video bloggers, social media evangelists. And here's the thing. Everyone is in this together. I guarantee you're not going to find a single Agile evangelist who isn't in the middle of some major issue at that moment, right? The thing about Agile is it's not like we learn it and now we're good. We're all Agile and we will always be Agile and we have that mindset and we are perfect, right? Otherwise you wouldn't need Scrum Masters, except for forming a team. Scrum Masters are around because a lot of times we revert to human behavior, which is not in the favor of Agile. We get defensive about things or we get under pressure and we start to drop our discipline and start to ball hog or want to control things. But if you find kind of this community to go out to, it's easy. You can start to say like, hey, I don't understand why this didn't work, or I don't know what to do. And you're going to find so many people that have common stories. And they're going to be like, yeah, I hit that too. Here's what I did that worked. Here's what I did that didn't work. Or I'm still working on that, but I have a few ideas. You just don't have to be in it alone. And you'll get a lot of great advice. Some of the places I really like is Agile for Humans and also Continuous Delivery. I would say if you're going to watch 2 podcasts or I watch them on YouTube, like you get a lot of great nuggets from these. Change things as you can. Not everybody's got the authority to make broad sweeping changes, but you can make small changes. Anybody can do that. If you're able to, try shortening the sprint. Shorter sprints are amazing for forcing teams to get Agile, because I guarantee if you're doing things wrong, you are not going to be able to deliver something in the week. It just promotes that you're going to have a lot of openness, a lot of sharing, a lot of individuals and interactions, a lot of focus on building working software. And again, it's going to expose a lot of problems. So you might get pushback from management. They might say you can't do that. You got to make it longer. But try it if you're able to, because it's really going to solve a lot of problems, or at least raise the problems that you need to address to the surface. If you have less influence, just talk about the impact the team will have in the sprint. So see if you can raise a topic during sprint planning, or ask what degree of progress the team's made towards the sprint goal, during the daily scrum again. The retrospective is a great opportunity. Sometimes don't just look for small things. Larger transformative efforts sometimes get more traction. So, if you're able to come in and say, hey, look, what we did isn't working very well, but if we did like automated testing, then we could introduce BDD, then we can get better acceptance criteria, then we could probably have more feedback and communication with the customer, and you bring in like kind of a larger concept, sometimes that gets more traction because it feels more like a project than a tweak. But smallest thing is just build better relationships in the team. I don't know. Go to Topgolf, grab some drinks, play games, anything to kind of introduce that people and person interaction, because it's all about the team. And the last thing is track your Agile health. So one tactic I've heard about, it was by Walter Vandermeer. and he had a scale. I talked about that summer in Calcutta and the spring in Fontainebleau. So just a line, and it was basically, here's, I feel horrible agilely, right? I feel like I'm just in this oppressive environment, and I feel like I want to run, skip, and be merry, and this is great. And then anybody in the team can go ahead and just grab a sticky and write whatever happened and put it on that line wherever they feel like it, right? Maybe I just delivered a feature or got done with a feature, and I brought in the stakeholder and I showed it to them, and the stakeholder was like, oh my gosh, you've just made my life so much better, and they give you a giant hug, and you're like, oh man, I feel amazing, that was great, right? Or maybe you just worked on something for 4 days and you got it done and you have no idea what you affected, and oh, okay, that goes on the other side. And then during the retros, you're not just talking about what happened in the sprint, but you're also talking about what was the mindset during the sprint, and what was the environment, and how did it get affected. And then you can start to maybe highlight what are some basic problems we have in agility that we can address. There's a concentration of a common theme in this area. Kind of gives you a little bit of awareness that you may not have otherwise. Otherwise, it just kind of blends into the background. But ultimately, Scrum's about creating and protecting an effective team, in my opinion. And the attributes of an effective team, it's the Agile values: individuals' interactions, working software that solves a problem, customer collaboration, response to change. It's all about focusing on that empirical evidence, which is verifiable and concrete, not story points. And if we do that, we're going to be less likely to fall into that zombie behavior. So it's really, even if you do Scrum wrong, if you come to it with an Agile mindset, it's going to start to course correct. So that's all I've got to talk about right now. Hopefully, it's only an hour, so I couldn't go too deep. But if you came in here, knowing what good Scrum could feel like, hopefully I've given you kind of a sense of that. How to affect your environment. There's certain ideas there. You don't have to personally feel horrible about it. And if you just stop acting like a zombie, you're going to feel better. And if you like zombies, that's what Midjourney does. So it didn't do perfect, because at the end, my protagonist turned into a zombie. But all of us have a little bit of zombie in us. So anyway, that's all I've got. Thanks for attending, and have a great time at the conference.